from the so-called Group of Seven, G7, a meeting in Japan this week. And the US President Joe Biden has arrived early for private talks with the country's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. We can see at the moment they're all sitting gathered. They just said hello to the US President and the Japanese leader. Well, one of the top issues on the agenda is the growing military influence and the geopolitical stance of China. And also, of course, Ukraine conflict expected to dominate the talks. Well, let's get a sense of what's going on from our man on the International Affairs desk, Oliver Farry. Oliver, Joe Biden arriving. Private talks first with the Japanese Prime Minister. What's on their agenda?
Well, most likely the security situation in the East Asia region will be top of the list. Japan has become increasingly wary of China's ambitions in the region. A flotilla of Chinese warships circumnavigated Japan's main islands last week, supposedly in response to what Chinese state media called Japan's provocative remarks on Taiwan. Now, Japan has stepped up military spending in recent years. This year's budget is 6.8 trillion yen, or 48 billion euros. Now, that's a 26% rise on last year, the biggest year-on-year since 1952. We can see it here. There are even talks of revising the country's pacifist constitution, which dates back to the American occupation in 1947, particularly Article 9, which renounces war on behalf of the Japanese state. Japan has also been taking part in war exercises with American troops, one in March this year, simulated defending and recapturing remote islands with the intention clearly being a potential Chinese invasion. China has a claim on Japan's Ryukyu Islands, which include Okinawa and were historically a Chinese tributary state. And this may all sound very far-fetched, and Japan is not on a war footing, far from it, but it's a marked change from previous times. China likes to say that other countries in the regions are being puppets of the United States, but while Washington clearly has its own motives for involvement in the region, these countries themselves, be they Japan, be they South Korea or Taiwan, they clearly have their own motives as well.
Interesting, just watching the images live behind you in Hiroshima between those conversations between Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister. You can see they're talking through translators at the moment. And as you say, you have to watch the subtleties here, the fact that they are meeting, Japan toughening up its own defence, all of a sudden becoming a key player for Joe Biden, a strategic player. All of the other leaders arrive tomorrow. Give us a sense of, is there something that the US are trying to come out with? Is there an overall communique that's likely to be agreed on with an agenda being set?
Well, the United States is probably being realistic enough to know that other G7 countries are not going to blindly follow Washington on every aspect of relations with China, but it would nonetheless like there to be a certain coherence in the messaging. Emmanuel Macron's comments on his trip to China last month raised a lot of eyebrows and were actually welcomed in Beijing. He said that Europe should resist pressure to become to blindly follow Washington in everything. But the United States is probably not losing that much sleep over them. They'll see them as rhetoric, very, very common among French presidents, particularly Macron. What they're more interested in is common security commitments, particularly in the South Pacific and Taiwan. Emmanuel Macron said that Taiwan may not be Europe's crisis, but there's no sense either that there is a serious wavering among Western countries on the matter. Europe is less likely to go along with Washington's avowed policy of decoupling on China. But Ursula von der Leyen's term de-risking is probably more accurate in terms of what Washington itself is doing. The US is not completely disengaging from China. It is reducing its dependency, but it's not completely cutting out all trade, mainly because other countries in the region's possible alternatives aren't really there because of logistical limitations. So Europe and the US might be closer than they appear. What Joe Biden, however, would like to see is that they ensure that European countries in particular do not let up on criticism simply because of trade. Ukraine actually makes this rather easy. Chinese Special Envoy Li Hui is trying to get get European countries on board to see China as a serious peace envoy, but that's probably not going to go down too well in Europe as of yet.
Oliver, almost orchestrated perfectly, because the round table for the press, where you have this 5 minutes to see what's going on, the all smiles between the two leaders, just finishing behind you as we speak. Oliver Farry, thank you from our international desk.